Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Alvaro. I'm from TPI 6A and I wanna tell you about a narrative text. Maybe you're not strange with narrative text, or it is very familiar things when you're little or when you grow up. You might be read a narrative text, or it's kind of it's type of one of type of short story. So I will tell you about narrative text. Narrative text definition. Narrative text is a story with compilation or problematic events, and it tries to find the resolution to solve the problems. One of narrative text is a short story. A short story is a short work of fiction. Fiction, as you know, is prose writing about imagined events and characters. A short story is a fictional prose composition. It can usually be read in one sitting and it can be very lengthy. According to Collins' dictionary, a short story is a prose narrative of shorter length than the novel, especially one that concentrates on a single theme. In conclusion, the definition of short story is a piece of fiction that has limited number of words, only few character, and one theme. So just like a short story has one theme and only one main character. The short story is one of the oldest types of literature, and it has existed in many forms, including myths, fairy tales, ballads, and parables. The modern short story, in an improved form, originated in the first quarter of the 19th century, first in the United States of America. Before the short story came into existence, different genres of literature had been popular in different periods. The short story took a long time to reach its modern form. It was very much influenced by the novel because it is the miniature form of that art of prose fiction. Unlike a novel, which might be read over several days or weeks, a short story is usually read in one burst. A novel can tackle multiple plots and themes with a variety of prominent characters. This makes it a more condensed text and one needing closer reading. Then, the social function of short story. First is to amuse or entertain readers with a story. So it is the main purpose of short story. When you read a short story, it might be entertain you with the story and you into the story and feel the story how the characters would like be or how the plots. And then the second is to teach a moral lesson through a story. It's important thing because almost all short story or novel or maybe you read a poem, you might find a moral lesson or moral lesson from the story. And then third is to provide unique literary experience through reading specific artistic genres. It's many genres of the narrative text or short story. And then the fourth is to provide a path to understand human experience and brings in rich insight to oneself and to others who have a special contribution of art to civilization. And then the next is structure of short story. The first is orientation. It introduces the characters, settings, and the situation. It is the background of information, so it is the first place of the short story or the narrative text or whatever that is. So it is the first words or the first paragraph. So it's like introduction. And then the second one is rising action. This includes the events leading up to the main problem or conflicts. It is like when you read a story of fairy tales like I mentioned before. Maybe you ever read Cinderella or Snow White. You found this story or the rise in action. While you read Snow White, you might found that the evil queen trying to kill her, but then the huntsmen are forbid the queen or reject the queen permissions. And then the third is climax. This is when the problem reaches a high point. The story reaches a crucial moment. The tension that is building reaches a peak. And then the fourth is a falling action. This is when the character work to solve the problem or conflict. It is sometimes called the denouement. This part of story explores the consequences of the climax. The tension in the story begins to ease. So it is like almost the end of the story, part of the end of the story, but it is not the end, a last but not the least. So where it is the main character trying to solve the problems. And then the fifth, or the E, is the resolution. This is how things end up in the story. The story's central problem is finally solved, leaving the reader with sense of completion. So it is the last part of the story. So the main character trying to solve the problems. And then the next is the elements of short story. There are some elements of short story. The first is characters. Characters are defined into two. They are, first is character are individuals that the story is about or the persons in the story. And then the second one is character are characteristic of a person. And then the B, or the second one, is setting. Setting is the time and location in which story takes place. So it is like a place where it's going to be, like, and the location or the time period. And then the C is plot. The plot is how the author arranges events to develop his basic idea. It is the sequence of events in a story or play. The plot is planned, logical series of events having a beginning, middle, and end. The short story usually has one plot, so it can be read in one sitting. So it's unlike a novel. It's like you can read short story in one sitting, just like when you are going out somewhere, when you're in a coffee shop or somewhere, that place you might be want to read. And then the fourth or the D is conflict. Conflict is a to essential plot. Without conflict, there is no plot. It is the opposition of forces which tries to one incident to another and makes the plot move. Every story has conflict to solve. The plot is centered on this conflict and the ways in which the character attempt to solve the problem. So the conflict is the main things in the story. So when you read a story, it must be has a conflict. So if it doesn't has a conflict, so it might be very bland and nothing. It's like it's very plain and you will feel nothing when you read it. And then a point of view. Point of view is the angle from which the story is told. There are four types of point of view. First person of view, using I to tell the story. Second person of point of view, the story is told to you. Third person of point of view, or omniscient. The story is still about he or she, but narrator has full access to thoughts and experience of all characters in the story. So The third point of view, it might be sometimes when you read a novel or a short story, it you, they mention or they write the story with the character with a name, and then the last one is theme. Theme is the main idea that weaves the story together. The why, the underlying ideas of what happens in the pieces of literature, often a statement about society or human nature. The theme in a piece of fiction, so its controlling idea or its central insight. It is the author's thoughts about topics or view of human nature. And then, characteristic of short story. First is, it can be read in one sitting, just like mentioned before. Edgar Allan Poe, in his essay, Ever Told That, the philosophy of composition, said that a short story should be read in one sitting, anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours. In contemporary fiction, a short story can range from 1,000 to 20,000 words, and then it contains little or no dialogue, but it may also made up of dialogue while the description is brief. So sometimes the short story has no dialogue, so it can be. Then C, or the third one, a modern short story describes all kinds of problems. Some short stories end by explaining what has been going on, possibly a surprising way. A successful ending leaves the reader wanting to know more about having to read the story again to make sure they have not missed anything the first time. So when you read a novel or a short story or narrative text and the story is very exciting to read and you want to know and you don't want to miss the end or you don't want to miss story, so you want to repeat it again. You want to repeat to read the story again. And then the D, it has a single setting, one central theme. The story has to keep the reader focused throughout in case they miss something. And then the last one, it has one main character with few additional minor character. The writer has to establish character and setting very quickly to allow the development of the short story. So short story only one have one main character. I was the last but not the least, so it was the least. It doesn't have so many complications in the plot. Because of the shorter length, a short story usually focuses in one plot. So short story is very short and only focus in one plot, not like a novel or something like that that you might find novel has a flashback or you might find the features of the story. So that was the explanation from me. I hope you understand what I'm saying. And thank you for listening and watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.